Hello. Hey. So I was actually invited to come speak on this topic last year because I wrote the book and published it in 2017. But I'm about to show you the reason I could not come last year. So, and I'm also happy to share with you that today is her birthday. She's only one. She doesn't know I'm gone. But to that effect, if you'll join me for a groupie, Mark told me this backstage, that what might make a great photo is if you guys could make hearts over your head, and then I'll send it to her way. Okay? Can you? I appreciate that. Happy birthday, Stella. Okay, I hope you had a great lunch, and let's talk some stuff about agents. So there's a pattern that I had observed in the world starting about 8 years ago. Can anyone tell me what this object is? No? It's a DSLR. It's a single lens reflex camera. The way you use it to get a picture is you power it up, make sure it's got a memory card, turn it on, find the right setting, take off the lens cap, put it up to your eye if you're old like me, or look at the LCD if you're younger. You take a picture, you look at the LCD, you decide on whether it's good enough or not. If it's not, you take another photo. If it is good enough, you can put it down and continue with whatever it was you're doing. Now, can anyone tell me what this object is? It's the Google Clips. Now, ostensibly, this is another camera, but it works a little bit differently. You charge that up, and as soon as you unplug it, it just starts taking photos constantly, every 15 or 20 seconds. And it has a machine learning algorithm in there that takes a look at all the images and decides what to do with those images. If it's a face that it recognizes or that you have authorized, or if it's a happy expression, or if it senses that there is some intense emotion going on, hopefully happy, it saves that image. And at the end of the day, it sends them to you and says, hey, what do you want me to do with these? You can sort of recoil in horror and say, no, my goodness, please don't do anything with that image, delete it. Or you could say, oh, this is great, share it to social media. But the idea is that you could set it up in the corner of your living room while you're teaching your young daughter to walk, and you don't have to think about capturing the moment. You can be in the moment. Now, the thing on the left is a tool for you to make a photograph. The thing on the right is a thing that just gets you photographs. That's interesting. Does anyone recognize this object? Anyone? Thank you. Very quiet, Swedish. It's a vacuum cleaner. You don't have to be afraid to be wrong. This is an obvious one. I don't ask trick questions till later. Yes, this is the Dyson vacuum cleaner. Trust you can see where I'm going with this. To get a clean floor, you pull it out of the closet, unwrap the cord, plug it in, step on the power, unlock the handle, and then you push it around to the floor that you want to clean. Who wants to guess what I'm about to show? This is also a thing that will get you clean floors. But to use it, you set up your preferences, then you go about your life. Mine is named Rusty. And the only time I really need to think about Rusty is when he gets stuck under the cabinets or I need to empty out his dustbin. The thing on the left is a tool to allow you to clean your floors. The thing on the right is a thing that gets you clean floors. That's interesting. Can anyone tell me what this object is? Thank you. It's nice and loud. Thank you for crossing the ocean to the American idiom. So yes, this is a car. It's a tool. I'm not going to belabor the point. But it is a thing that lets you sit in it and use all of its very mature interface to get yourself and your passengers and your cargo from point A to point B. Let's contrast that with the Google self-driving car. You pick up your phone, you tell it where you want to go, and it pulls up and you sit in the car, and there's no steering wheel. It just takes you from point A to point B. That's interesting. So it was on about 8 years ago that I was doing designing a Robo Investor. and for a major financial firm. And the notion with a Robo Investor is that you tell it what your financial goals are. I expect my kids to go to college at this time. I hope to retire at this time. I dare think that I can afford a house in the Bay Area at this time. You tell it how much money you're willing to give it each month, and from that point forward, the Robo Investor manages a portfolio of stocks. It rebalances daily, and you don't have to think about it. And I was thinking, this is such a weird thing, because it's not like there are interfaces to use it. There are interfaces to tell it what to do, and after that, it just does it for you. So I started to see this pattern in the world of things that we grant agency to act on our behalf. And I thought, okay, I should go out and find somebody who's written about this material and captured all the design patterns. Couldn't find that book, so I decided to write that book. And I needed a name for this category of technology that seemed to be operating differently. And since we granted all these things agency to act on our behalf, I went back into English and looked up the adjective form. Turns out that it's agentive, is something that has agency. So I called this category Agentive Tech in order to be able to write about it and think about it. Now, when I first presented that idea and those examples to some college students in San Francisco, they said, okay, we agree it's a cool thing, but so what? Those are first world problems. Who cares if you have to drive yourself? Who cares if you have to vacuum your own floors? And I thought about that, and they're right. Those are first world problems. So I went out into the world to look for non-first world problems that were also agents. I'm going to share those with you now. In the upper left-hand corner, we have a service that is an agent that is particularly American in its disposition. The way it works is it sprinkles, the service will go to a precinct in the United States with whom they've partnered, and they will sprinkle microphones all over the neighborhood that are trained to listen for gunfire. And when one of those microphones hears gunfire, it records the millisecond that it heard it, and it reports it back to a central server that triangulates all the microphones that heard it and can pinpoint the shot to within 1 meter accuracy. It reduces police response times from 20 minutes to around 5. And in fact, they know exactly where on a GPS map they need to go in order to see what the problem was. In the upper right-hand corner is a service called Kite String. It's kind of like a digital chaperone. The idea is that you're going on a date. And before you go on the date, you set a time and a message. And you give it to Kite String. And then at the time, Kite String reaches out to you, sends you a little text and says, hey, are you okay? Well, if you give it your password, it just says, rock on, deletes all your information from the server. You can give it a fake password, or if you don't respond, it will send the message that you have given it to a person that you have identified. And theoretically, the message is, hey, I'm on a date, here's the address. I'm not responding, please help. It's not a replacement for responsibility or a human chaperone, but it's an additional tool. It's an agent that can keep people safe. In the lower left-hand corner, what looks like a green Roomba is pretty much a green Roomba, except instead of cleaning your floors, it helps weed gardens. That little tiny green piece of plastic spins around and lops the weeds off at the ground. And it was designed by a couple of people who used to be at Roomba, so that's why it looks that way. But it helps farmers manage a much larger plot of land than before. So feeding people, not necessarily a first world problem. And in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see a service called Scarecrow. This is a drone that is trained to fly above endangered herds and keep an eye on any humans that are approaching. And if it recognizes those humans are park rangers, it doesn't do anything. But if it doesn't recognize the humans, it flies down, and the wasp-like noise of the drone scares the herd in a safe direction. Now, in full disclosure, I made that last one up. But the way I made it up is the important thing, is I took these principles that I had been identifying in agents in the world, and I simply applied them to a problem that I cared about, which was animal welfare in the Anthropocene. I presented this material to students in Delft last year, and one of them raised their hand and said, you don't have to make that up anymore. Somebody in, somebody in our country is making that. So here's the AV drone. It's trained to hover above endangered herds and scare them in the safe direction. So really, all that bit is just to say that Agentive tech, it's easy to explain the first world examples, but I believe it's as big as you can think. So it's a new pattern, and it's an expansive pattern, and that makes it interesting. Now, if you studied AI, you may rightly be thinking, well, wait a minute, isn't this just automation? It's a good question. But automation seeks as its goal the elimination of human interaction. If a human has to be involved, the system is failing somehow. But the patterns that I've identified, the Agentive products and services, see humans as the point. They are always a part of the interaction. They are doing the work on behalf of that human, right? Agentive tech is about its people. And so it's not the same thing as automation. And from an interaction design standpoint, that means it's interesting. Did I say it's interesting? Let me talk a little bit more about that. So one of the cool things about Agentive tech is it's new. You'll see that that word is in air quotes. And that's because that image in the background, I won't ask you if you recognize it. It's an autopilot. But I will ask you, do you know what year the autopilot was first introduced? It's earlier than you think. 35. Anyone go lower? 1914. In the World's Fair, the first autopilot was introduced. It was electromechanical, of course. But that is a singular example. When I talk about Agentive tech being new, I'm talking about the fact that we all carry supercomputers in our pockets that are connected to a vast global network where we can talk to almost any computer anywhere at any time. And of the 30-odd examples of agents that I have in the book, 95% of them are from within the last 6 years. You and I can imagine an agent, we can design that agent, we can prototype that agent within the course of about a week, let's say, if you know how to design Sprint. So that's what I mean when I say that it is new. It's new to us. Second reason it's interesting is that it's different. If you studied interaction design sort of classically, the model of design was a hammer. You would talk about the affordances of the hammer. You would talk about the constraints of the hammer and the feedback loop that you have as you use the hammer to hammer a nail into a piece of wood. And that just sort of fails when we talk about agents. An agent does its work out of your attention, and it can sort of change its behavior according to what you want in the context. That's not a hammer. A better model is that of a butler, right? A butler knows what your goals are. In full disclosure, I don't have a butler. I imagine that a butler knows what your goals are, will do what that butler needs to do in order to help you achieve those goals, and only bugs you when there's something important that needs to be discussed. That's a pretty good model. Now, rather than sticking to the metaphor, I want to show you a more abstract model. This is my modification of the see, think, do loop that is sometimes regarded as the sort of atomic element of scenarios. User sees something in the system state. They think, well, that's not right. What do I need to do next? They do something, and that changes the state of the machine. That model works great when we're talking about things like hammers or older software systems. But when we think about Agentive technology, the model gets a little bit different. Because if the red is what the human is doing, and the blue is what the computer is doing, with an Agentive, oh, and I see a whole lot of cameras. Just go to that URL. Oh, you're going to photograph the URL. OK, that's fine. But you'll see that diagram in its full glory there. But in the Agentive model, if blue is a computer, there is a computer that's sort of responding, but there's also a computer that's doing the work, doing the seeing, doing the thinking, doing the doing, with the human on the outside optionally working in or getting notifications. And so I set out to find what each of those unique use cases were that only belong to agents and not to more traditional software designs. So that's interesting. These are all new and unique use cases that have to be addressed by us designer types. A third is that Agentive technology represents the sort of pinnacle of user design. User experience design. Wouldn't that be weird if a world we actually designed our users? And what I mean by this is to say that one of the goals that we have is to maximize user value compared to the amount of effort it takes to get that value. And if the agent is doing its work while you're not even paying attention to it, that's nearly infinite, right? That's a big promise. You may be familiar with Pine and Gilmore's model from the experience economy, where they identified that these three classes of goods had a relationship to effort and cost, meaning that the more work that you do on behalf of your user, the more money you're willing to pay for that. Their example was a cup of coffee. If you're going into a warehouse where you're buying commodity beans, well, you'll pay pennies for that cup of coffee that you end up drinking. If you go to the store and buy a product, they've done more work. They've ground it for you. They've put pretty packaging for it. They've made sure it's there in the grocery store. And if you go into a restaurant, well, they'll even brew it for you and clean the cup. In each case, they're doing more work, and in each case, you pay a greater premium. They wrote their book to ask why on earth we would pay 50 crowns for a latte. But their notion was that, oh, it's a better experience, and that's what we pay for. But for my interest, you'll note that all four of these categories of goods still require the user's attention to unlock their value. You have to be in the warehouse. You have to go to the grocery store. You have to be in the restaurant. Or you have to pay 50 crowns for a latte. But an agent, that's not true, right? The amount of time that you are willing and able to spend on with a piece of software is very limited. Even if you are up 16 hours a day, you've got your work, you've got other things demanding your attention, and they're all competing for it. But if an agent, if my Roomba is doing work while I'm at work myself, well, that's nearly an infinite playing field, right? The amount of value and the place that it plays in the user's life is much smaller, even providing that same value. That's pretty interesting from a business perspective. Fourth reason is that it's threshold. I'm using P.W. Singer's term here. He defined a threshold technology as one that once a culture adopts it, they are loath to go back. In this case, it's like vacuuming. I know it's totally first world, but once you've had a Roomba in your life for a little while, it feels like extra drudgery to have to go to the closet and pull out the vacuum cleaner and push this object around. The fifth reason is Agentive provides new meaning. And I'm going to thank Yuan for prompting this one. He asked me about it. He said, what new meaning do agents provide? Well, the first one is time. Right, we were just speaking about the Roomba as sort of a labor-saving device. And that raises the question, what do you do with the extra time that an agent can give you? Certainly, if you're pressured, you can do more work, but it also opens the possibility for you to do quality of life stuff. Right? The women's liberation movement throughout the 20th century was largely connected to the availability of labor-saving devices in the home. And it's my conjecture that agents will free us up to do from a lot of tedium and will allow us to pursue quality of life tasks. A second is this last concept of personalization, right? Our industry is largely built around personas, which is let's get it 80% right for 80% of the people, and then we'll let personalization handle the rest. Preferences, settings, that sort of thing. But that still requires a user to do the work to get that kind of personalization. Agents in machine learning tell us that that's not necessarily a thing we have to do anymore. We don't have to ask our users to bring the device closer to fit their lives. Machine learning can just make it seamless and effortless. That's pretty cool. That's providing a little more meaning around the devices in our lives know us, can help us more. They also help with personal discovery, right? Some of the labor that agents can do on our behalf, humans just can't do it. I mean, I'd be really impressed if anyone in this room, I could walk up and tell you 3 of my favorite songs, and you have an encyclopedia of music in your head where you can think about every song ever digitized and recommend one song that's going to match my interests, and do it every 3 minutes for the rest of your life. Right? That agent is helping me do a labor that a human could not. It's helping me discover new music. That's pretty cool. But it doesn't end there. Chef Watson, if you've not heard about it, is an agent that has looked at every recipe on the internet and abstracted them into core patterns. You can approach Chef Watson and say, hey, I kind of have a lemon in my refrigerator. I'm interested in a cookie. What can you do for me? And you can tell it whether you like an Eastern balancing of flavors or a Western optimization of flavors, and even how crazy you want it to drift from the core recipe, right? And the cool thing is you can even tell it, I want you to give me a recipe that you have never given another human. It's not always hit. Oftentimes it's a miss. But once it's a hit, there's a community of people who gather together and go, Watson totally shared with me this weird pine nut cookie and biscotti, and you guys have to try it. That's where that cookbook came from, right? And it's literally helping humans discover new food experiences. That's a global discovery that an agent is helping us with. That's pretty cool. But it doesn't end there. Our time on this planet is limited by our star. I mean, we have a couple of billion years before it swallows our planet. But by that time, we certainly have to have some contingency plans underway, right? And we can send humans out into space, but it's an expensive, risky undertaking. It's much better to send robots in advance. And the farther those robots get away from humans, the more they have to handle things on their own because the communication times are so long. That requires an agentive solution. So it's my conjecture that agents are really going to be helping us literally survive the explosion of our home star. That's an existential discovery. That's some new meaning I can get behind. Lastly, Agentive is AI. I'm enough of a nerd that I like to solve new problems. And they had not seen my deck when they did that cool intro animation to know that I included a brain in here. But this is a particular kind of AI. Now, I'm enough of a sci-fi nerd that I know that a lot of folks are thinking, oh, you mean like BB-8? No, I'm a fan of BB-8. I have a nerdy website where I talk about that sort of stuff. But I'm really talking about the stuff that's in the world today. Watson is a narrow artificial intelligence. And the AI is an interesting new material, and I want to know what to do with it. I look at white papers that are showing me sigmas and incredible calculus, and I couldn't make any sense of all that. What I could make sense of is finding out how it helps a human achieve their goals. That was interesting to me. And this model I'm sharing with you because I believe it can help you grasp all of those complexities about recursive neural networks and regression algorithms and put them into a context that makes sense. So hopefully I've convinced you that Agentive tech is a new, real sort of thing and that it's interesting. Now I want to set a little bit of a nuance on it. Right? I've been showing you Agentive products and services as if that's all they were. Right? It's a category of the product. That's not true. If you think of all the things that an AI can do and all the things that a human can do, let's call the things that the human can do manual and the things that an AI can do sort of automatic. There's an overlap. Oh, this graph gets better. I'll tell you when. It's the overlap that's sort of the interesting place. How does this AI pair with this human in order to get things that the human wants done? Now, by default, I think we are good about thinking about the one that's actually closer on that side, which is the assistant, right? I'm doing a thing and I want an AI to help me. But this one on the left, where it's actually doing the work for me, is sort of brand new. But it just really shows that there's a spectrum here where agentive tech and assistant tech are just modes of use. There are certainly products that only belong to one category. The vacuum cleaner is strictly manual. It doesn't have a mode where I can just say, remove the handle and kick it on its Roomba way. And the Roomba doesn't really have a manual mode where I can stick a handle on it and push it around in order to vacuum something particularly. One of my favorite examples is the garden owl. I shared this with my students yesterday. It's a great product. You put batteries in it and you stick it in your garden and it has a motion sensor. And whenever the motion sensor kicks off, the owl head turns towards the motion and goes, whoo. The idea is that it scares rodents away. But it's strictly automatic. There is no scenario that you can write where a human's doing anything other than changing the battery or getting scared rodents out of their garden. But these are simple examples, right? More sophisticated examples, like the spell check in your phone, or the text entry in your phone, let me correct, spans all these modes. It's manual because you're typing things in. It's an assistant because it's saying, hey, I can finish this word, or if you use an Android, this sentence for you. It's agentive because if you don't even pay attention, it'll correct words for you, sometimes frustratingly. But it spans all those modes, and I think my conjecture is that most products, as they mature and get sophisticated, will cross all of these modes. So it means that we're going to have to master them, right? But agentive is just one mode of that AI interaction, and that's really interesting. Okay, so we've talked about what an agentive technology might be. I've told you why it's interesting, and I've contextualized it sort of as a mode of interaction. Let me wrap up by also saying that while I think this is interesting, I don't think you necessarily need to care yet. User experience has a habit of absorbing AI. And here we're going to time travel back to 1988, when spell check was its own software. I don't know if there's anyone out here, old as I am, who can remember this. But the way it worked is you would type in a word processing program, then you would close the program, open up a spell check program, and point it at the file. It would go through, make spelling suggestions, then you would close the spell check software and open up your word processing in order to add new text to it. It wasn't until 1989, just a year later, but WordPerfect 5.1 and 6.0 added it into their software. That's amazing. But you still had to invoke it. You had to pull it down from a menu and say, yes, I now want you to spell check. And it was a thing that could only occur when you were doing nothing else. Right nowadays, spell check is like this persistent agent. Companies don't even talk about it when they tell you about a new product because it's just baked in. En route to this holy grail, right? We have some new things to learn. We have new processes to shepherd, such as how a technology works in an agentive mode. We have new resources to draw on, like the APIs that you can get from my employer, IBM. We have some new models to master, but if we do, we can help make this team the best that it can possibly be. If you're interested in these ideas or reading more, yes, I'm selling a book. It's called Designing Agentive Technology with Rosenfeld Media, and I'd love to hear what you think. Thank you all. I don't get furniture? Why did everybody else get furniture?
The lounge is back there. We've got the whole green room.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So how will our way of working be affected when designing agentive services that learn and adapt over time?
And you mean, how will designers work change?
Exactly.
I suspect that many of the low-level tasks that we do as designers, we can just hand off to agents who can do a lot of things. Establish a visual hierarchy or give me 4 options that I can select from. Mm-hmm. I think that will put us into more of a strategic place where personally I like spending more time anyway.
Mm-hmm. Also, what are some of the biggest challenges you see going forward with designing for AI? Was it the ethical issues? Is it the lack of data? Is it our lack of skill so far?
There's certainly a tactical problem, right? We have to deal with all the ground level truths of not enough data or big data or, holy cow, the ethical implications of AI and badly biased software. But I think the bigger problems are the social ones that will emerge. But we have already thinkers involved in that. Mm-hmm. Like when we have a really functioning narrow AI, we're going to lose some jobs and we have some social problems to solve. If we ever get to general AI, we're going to have something of an existential crisis. What does it mean to be a human when I can't do anything better than an AI can do?
I think we're already starting that.
Yeah. And if we get to super AI, well, we'll deal with that when we get to it.
So, fantastic. Taylor, didn't you have a question to Chris as well?
What's the most embarrassing thing that's happened to you while using an agent?
Well, what's the most embarrassing thing? Well, it's not embarrassing, but an agent did try to kill me once.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's embarrassing.
Tell us more.
Before the birth of our first child, my husband and I went to Australia for a baby moon, and we thought they have a giant desert. We should totally drive across that desert. And we had a Garmin with us, a little wayfinder. And we were looking for a tiny town to sleep over on our way to Brisbane called Cobar. And we're from a really big city. San Francisco is just like, it's a big city. And as we were sort of driving, we passed this like small collection of buildings that were just tiny things on stilts. And we thought certainly that wasn't a city, and we kept going. And as we kept going, and it was getting darker and darker, and we were like, what does the Garmin say? And the agent had said, oh yeah, all you need to do is go forward and turn around and come back, and you'll get to Cobar. And we were like, okay, that's good. Well, we're American. We don't speak in kilometers.
No.
So when it said go forward 300 kilometers and turn around, we pulled over and we did the math, and we were like, oh. We're in the middle of the outback, so we just ignored the agent that was trying to kill us and turned around.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you. Oh, thank you so much.